that work as well? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to session 3 of the AUE Conference here at Keele. My name's Chris Holland. I'm the Facilities Manager based on the Science Park here at Keele University. They're the fairly new buildings you've seen as you've drove in into site, hopefully the nice shiny ones of mine. I'm introducing you today as Richard Hipkiss. Richard works as Chairman of the Energy Services and Technology Association. He's also a Director of Information Profits. I've had the pleasure of working with Richard before in the past as well, and he's very enthusiastic at what he does, and I'm sure you'll enjoy his speech. The title of his talk is Going Beyond the Standard Route of Compliance for a Low Carbon Estate. Can I introduce Richard to you? Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Well, good afternoon, everybody. There's more of you than I expected from going outside. You must have all found a nice nook and cranny in Keele University for the last hour or so. So, going beyond the standard route for a low-carbon estate. Well, I've just heard that Keele's going to hit carbon neutral by 2020. So, we should just all follow what Keele's going to do. That's the answer, isn't it, Paul? A little bit more about myself. I am an engineer from background. I started off in the water industry through an apprenticeship route about 22 years ago. Electrical engineering being my trade of the day. Very quickly multitasking when they made all of the guys that took the motors out redundant. So moving across into mechanical and electrical engineering. It was a really interesting sector to work in 20 odd years ago because it was all about the process. All about what actually happened from a dirty water to a clean water approach, which a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today are quite common. So in a sense of the process of energy management is very much about how we use it. As Chris said, I'm also the chairman of ESTA. ESTA, for those that don't know, is the Energy Services and Technology Association, a members organisation of about 120 different organisations ranging from energy suppliers, meter manufacturers, boiler manufacturers, LED lighting, etc. A real diverse pool of knowledge that all comes together to try and present some expertise for end users. There's a couple of things there that I wanted to mention to look out for. ESTA, along with the Energy Institute, will be launching at the end of October a register of professional energy consultants. So the idea here is that it fills a gap whereby the Carbon Trust left behind in the sense of having an approved set of consultants. So if you have a look for RPEC in end October, November, it's an accreditation scheme where consultants have gone through to demonstrate their independence, and it'll be a good pool of resource if you need any external support. And the second thing to look out for that some of you might be interested in is that ESTA have been working with the Carbon Management Association and will be launching the Energy Managers Association November, December this year. Okay? The idea there, again, all about best practice, cross-sector, bringing together energy managers, energy engineers to really help each other out. Okay? That's the principle of it. So, a little bit about today. 45 minutes. Lights are down, so you can either take it for a snooze before the next speaker, or I'll try and hold your interest and hit my number one objective, which is provoke thought. Okay? One of the things that I'm quite an advocate of is that there is not one right way of doing anything, particularly when it comes to energy management. In a sense of considering the process of the management, it should think outside the box. Consider worst and best practice. And my final objective is to convince you all that compliance requirements have a good, positive value for your organisation. I've made no secret over the last 3 or 4 years that I'm a big advocate of things like the Carbon Reduction Commitment and the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, DECs. I believe you've had a seminar on building regulations this morning, which is going to get more and more challenging for engineers. And that's why I'm a great advocate of compliance, because it challenges us to think further. It actually puts a structure down and lays down a challenge for us to go well beyond where we are at the moment. It forces change. Unfortunately, that doesn't mean that I'm advocating that schemes such as the CRC have been well thought out and well deployed. Okay? You can't change a trend of a government that's been going on for years. It's a great idea. Deployment obviously needs to improve. So, starting point really, going beyond compliance, going beyond the standard route, really defining what I mean by compliance. Because whenever we say compliance, we automatically think about the legal requirements. To comply with the legal requirements means compliance. Actually, I wanted to break it down a bit further, that compliance can take into account a wish of an organisation or a command from a body, which may be your own organisation, or a set of rules or a set of standards. So to comply, compliance could fall into any of those categories, which actually creates an element of conflict. If we kind of put those into categories, if we took a command, then a command is likely to be something that we have to do. There is no choice. So it becomes a legal requirement. So energy performance certificates, DECs, CRC, compliance with building regulations is all a direct command that has got a framework that we have to comply to. A little bit softer, but as equally as commanding, are the rules that we have to follow. In terms of the sector, it's following the higher education rules in terms of carbon management, in terms of the routes to compliance, and then more internally focusing internal policy. Of all the sectors that I've worked in over the years, policy is liked probably the most within the university sector. Policy committees, a policy for... In fact, did everybody have a policy of getting here today? That's how diverse it seems to be in the university sector. And then the wish, the good practice, corporate social responsibility, sector responsibility. Green League seems to drive organisations, people and planet. The public-facing approach in terms of compliance, what's expected from your peers. And then finally standards, encouragement to follow the rules. It was a requirement for Hipkiss funding to have a carbon management plan. I'm yet to come across a university that's not got a carbon management in place. I'm yet to come across a university that's got a carbon management plan that is foolproof, robust, dynamic, and actually drives their carbon strategy in any detail. I'm trying to provoke thought. Not arguments yet, we'll save the discussion to the end. But in terms of it, each one of those areas all has a part to play. But when we look at what's the norm, what's the standard route of compliance, then it tends to be risk that drives the decision factor. Now, at the high level of risk, it's, if I don't do it, am I going to get fined? Is there a pain that we'll face by not complying with a certain regulation or a certain requirement, of which could be at an organisation level, it could be at a senior manager, or it could be at an individual level. So the different analysis of risk when it comes to prioritising tend to differ from organisation to organisation. A few examples. If I took two elements of legal compliance, CRC, if your organisation was captured by CRC, you've pretty much had no choice but to comply. So every organisation will have gone through the remit of collecting their metered information, making the returns and purchasing the allowances. Yet display energy certificates, a legal requirement, a fine structure in place. There's still a mix of compliance across organisations, largely seen as, well, we will update our decks, but when we get round to it, in many cases. Okay? Because the actual enforcement of it, nobody comes to check they're up to date on the wall, so it's more of a less risk in terms of legislation. If I then take the carbon management plan, okay, which everybody's got in place because it was a requirement of Hipkiss funding, against ISO 50001 or ISO 14001, that can be more dynamic, as hopefully we're going to see. There's more of a drive to do the carbon management plan than standards that will actually lead to continual improvement. So what is the value from compliance? Well, top level summary, 3 A's, gets the attention. Okay, so all of the things that we saw in the 4 quadrants, they bring attention across the organisation and from a wider group of stakeholders. Okay. One of the things that I think CRC was brilliant at doing was making people stand up and take notice and say, well, actually, we have got to pay attention to our carbon emissions and we have got to monitor and reduce our energy consumption. That led to the second day of taking action. Okay. Reporting had to be validated, it had to be accurate, it had to be timely. Okay. With a deadline for a submission for a CRC report being at the end of July, there was no excuse. It couldn't be held off until October. So it drives action. And then ability. Again, the final part of it, what we saw in terms of resource, if there's something that grabs the attention at the highest level and cross levels and drives action, it increases the ability, either by getting people's knowledge more up to date or increasing the resource available. So if we actually look at all of the actions that we carry out, a few isolated actions that we see there, some that I've already mentioned, others more technology, metering, BMS, asset management, internal auditing, Green League, they all sit in many cases as isolated actions, and that's just a fraction of the policy. It's not taking into account some of the environmental aspects of it, taking into account water, travel, transport, etc. It's just trying to focus at the high level. How many organisations actually have a coordinated approach to all of those actions? Okay. There's probably some that overlap, some that are quite far from each other, particularly around the carbon management plan and CRC responsibility. Can be quite a challenge, especially since if you're in CRC, if you're reporting to Hipkiss, if you've got CHP and reporting in EU ETS, and you're doing your DECs, you're already using 4 different emission factors and reporting over 4 different periods of the year. So it's not as though it's been made very, very easy for you guys, right, as challenging as a sector. But if you consider them as a series of joined-up actions, then you're actually into integrated system territory. Okay, so I'm sure everybody's heard of 50,001. I know there's a number of organisations that have either already achieved it or are on the path to achieve it. 50,001 is all about continual improvement, and it's all about aligning policy and procedure that actually improves efficiency and drives reductions. Now, the key term for it is energy management system. There's a huge myth and a huge amount of mismarketing out there in the energy marketplace that if you have an AM&T system or a BMS system or AMR, that you have an energy management system. You don't. You have one part of it. You have the monitoring, measurement and analysis. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have a management system to deal with what comes out of that. So BMS, M&T, AM&T, essential parts of it, but it's the management system as a whole that drives you through delivering your policy, ensuring that you plan to meet the objectives of your policy at a high level, implement and operate, ensuring that you've got the resources in place, checking on a routine basis based upon measurement and analysis, and correcting non-conformities. So having it embedded within a group of processes, the benefit of an integrated system is efficiency. It's ensuring that the structure is in place to continually improve. Highlights of the text, just to go through a few key things there in a sense of what's important within a management system. Organisation structure, ensuring that individual elements of the organisation are on the same wavelength, are driving towards the same objective. Quite often in organisations we see that an organisational is structured to conflict. Engineering conflicts with finance, HR conflicts with environment. It's very, very important in terms of a management system to involve the organisation and not just one department. That leads on to resources. And when we talk about resources, we don't just mean people, man-hours, engineers, energy managers. It's about ensuring that we've got access to the finance to meet the policy aims and the technology to meet the policy aims. Okay? So rather than starting with a target within an energy management system, it should start with an analysis and a gap analysis of what resources are available to show what possibly can be delivered, rather than create a target that is unachievable. Linking those two together, it's ensuring that you can draw on the resources that you already have within your organisation, experts in legal, experts in communication, experts within finance. I'll come back to on that in a moment. And ensuring that there's responsibility. Responsibility of management, responsibility at all levels. One of the things that we've seen evolve over the last 10, 15 years is that energy and carbon ultimately becomes somebody's role, whether that be at a director level, at a senior manager level, or at an individual technician level. Energy becomes somebody's role where there's a responsibility but not the full effect to drive change. So in effect, it has to become everybody's responsibility. I talked about policy earlier. We see a lot of policies. Sustainability policy framework, bringing together energy policy, environmental policy, procurement policy, even extending out into fair trade, food waste, etc. They should all be part of the same framework that drive into some kind of a hierarchy. One of the challenges there can be the carbon management plan that ultimately follows targets that have already been laid down for you to achieve. Either adopt the carbon management plan as the main policy and everything feeds into driving the objective of it, or consider the carbon management plan as a carbon report. Okay, so rather than holding all of the information and holding all of the key facts, it just becomes a report on the performance of carbon emissions. Talked about resources. Give a few examples here. In a sense of, there's a lot of knowledge in this room, right, around different areas. A lot of you will have come electrical, mechanical, like myself, and specialised in that area. What we don't want to be doing as engineers is creating investment rate of return calculations, net present value of a technology that we want to install, trying to use MAC curves with financial outputs to drive what we do technically, particularly when you've got financial and legal experts already within your organisation that talk that language. So one of the key things from a management system is to ensure that you've got this level of understanding. They understand what you do, you understand what they do. And there's a whole host of examples there. When we talk about training, cultural change, behavioural change, rolling out awareness so that everybody on campus actually changes their behaviour. You've probably got a whole human resources department that is all there to manage people's behaviour. They're probably the best people to roll out that part of the management system. Which leads to experts. So the definition of an expert is somebody that's got a comprehensive and authoritative knowledge within one individual area. And the danger is that we all become generalists, because we all do so many things that expertise actually gets killed within organisations. Okay. It's really nice to see you all here today, in a sense of engineers collectively within a sector. I did a conference a few weeks ago within the local authority sector, and there was probably about a third of the people there, because there'd either been a high level of retirement, early retirement, redundancies. Expertise had been lost. Okay. Key thing with a management system is to ensure that there's a legacy around that expertise that you leave in place to ensure that even the simplest management tasks happen over time, and that knowledge isn't lost through change in the university. I mentioned about communicating performance in a sense of using what you have within your organisation, the marketing teams, the external facing bodies that promote the university to the wider stakeholders. Okay. Almost, well, not almost, all universities these days have a fancy and very knowledge-rich website in terms of what the university can offer its students. That is the perfect vehicle to change behaviour in terms of sustainability framework, energy reductions, and driving low carbon. Okay. In fact, I always consider myself in the wasted generation. When I'm at home, married with 3 kids, it's my 2 9-year-old daughters that are telling us to recycle. Okay. Because their behaviour has been changed from the off. They do it at school, they learn about it, and they practice it in the school environment. Okay. I've given in with my wife now. You know, she leaves the TV on, she leaves the lights on, and she challenges with recycle. You know. But the kids, they'll do it for her. So, just bringing it all back together, conscious that a little bit of waffle there, but you know, 45 minutes is a long time, so making it fit and keeping it active to keep you all awake. Bring it all together into a process, continual improvement, try and break it down simple. Because one of the things that tends to put organisations off ISO 50001 is you pick up the document, the ISO 50001 standard, it's probably about 26, 28 pages if you've read it. 18 pages of it are definitions, defining everything else that you're going to read. There's probably 3 or 4 pages in that whole document that actually define the process from start to end in terms of something that's connected. If you take that into real basic terms, it's about preparation, update, policy, action plan, identification of opportunities, development of a compliance register, development of an opportunities register that show where projects can actually be implemented, building the business case, working with the financial guys to actually build the rate of returns, developing the MAC curve, engaging with the stakeholders so everybody's on board what's happening. Okay? Seen some great outputs where stakeholders haven't been engaged through this planning process. We've been doing some work with a construction company recently that has a lot of mobile sites, so they use a lot of porta cabins. So they put a great length of time and effort within these porta cabins to put occupancy sensing on the heating and the lighting. Within 2 weeks on site, the guys have worked out that if they put black tape over the PIR, it stays on all the time, so when they get there in the morning, their boots are warm. Imagine the difference that stakeholder engagement would have had in that rollout. Driving it through, implementing process, again, this is where the concepts of the likes of CRC has changed organisations' approach. Actually auditing the savings, actually considering the actions that we've just carried out, have they had an impact? Reviewing it to improve. Okay? Change the process, change the policy. Now, when you see ISO 50001 case studies, quite often most of them are in industry. Reason for that shouldn't really be a surprise. Industrial process doesn't change a great deal. Raw material in, product out. Okay? When you start to map that for a university, it tends to look a bit more like that, in a sense that there are multiple roads to the same end. Okay? So how long's the journey? Well, the journey is continuous. Okay? And actually the accreditation to 50001, if you wanted to go that far, is only about approving the policies and the procedures, not necessarily the implementation of it. The key thing is about continual improvement, so whichever path you get forced to go on by whichever element of compliance, you're ready for it, you're prepared, you have the tools within your management system to face every eventuality. So, from a broad perspective, understanding your own organisation, objective there, ensuring that other elements of your organisation understand what your role is, quite a challenge. 3 key points. Don't wait for new legislation, don't wait for the legal change, create a structure that strengthens your compliance approach now. Okay? Compliance meaning wish, command, action, rules. Be future-proof. Okay? Move forward with the systems to automate as much as possible. Document procedures that enables somebody else in the organisation to pick it up if needs be. And rather than focus on compliance as a we must do this, adoption of an integrity mindset, adoption of a mindset that says we're going to do these things right, we're going to do them right so we can do them again next year, and we don't have to put aside 2 weeks to do this report, or 3 weeks to survey all these buildings, or all of these meetings, effectively has a greater value to your organisation, which ultimately focuses on the long term. So it thinks, where are we going to be, or where could we be in 5 or 10 years' time? Rather than trying to chase a target for zero carbon, chase a target for continual improvement. So the objective is to improve on where you are currently. That enables you to demonstrate the results in the short term. So just to finish, that's what compliance can make you look like at times. Right? I think that's what the government looks like a little bit with CRC. Right? Doesn't have to be like that. What might seem a threat is actually an asset. Right? Embrace it. Turn it into something useful within your organisation so it can actually be a benefit. And I wanted to finish with Keele University. A good relationship with the guys at Keele. Very much advocates of everything that I've just talked about. Embracing the threat, considering how it can be used in a wider extent. 2 examples within that. Display energy certificates. About to renew them now for the 5th time, and they have actually improved. You know, they have a number of B-rated, I believe an A-rated building, and they've been a great stakeholder engagement tool to drive wider than the engineering and technical community. They've also validated information in terms of metering. So Keele were very proud last year to be the top university in the CRC league table. So they stay in that top echelon this year. I'm sure they will with all of the actions. So, time for a few questions, discussion. Anybody wants to pick up on any point? We've got about 10-15 minutes. Or swiftly move on to the next speaker. Anybody? Has any organisation implemented 50001 in terms of or management systems within their organisation? Anybody on the path to implement 50001 within their organisation? Would anybody like a sales brochure about implementing 50,001 within their organisation? Okay. Okay, well, I'll wrap it up then. Thank you very much.
Even though there wasn't many questions, I think Richard still managed to achieve his aim of provoke a bit of thought there, so you might well want to go back and start looking at 50,001 if nothing else. So the AUE would like to thank Richard for his time today with a small gesture. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you.